Ronald Wilson Reagan was born on February 6, 1911, in the small town of Tampico, Illinois, during a time when the United States was still largely rural and deeply shaped by traditional values. His father, Jack Reagan, was a salesman who struggled with alcoholism, while his mother, Nell Reagan, was a deeply religious and optimistic woman who strongly influenced Ronald's worldview. From an early age, Reagan learned the importance of storytelling, optimism, and belief in individual responsibility, ideas that would later become central to his political philosophy. As a young man, Reagan worked various jobs, including as a lifeguard, where he claimed to have saved dozens of lives. He attended Eureka College, a small liberal arts school, where he studied economics and sociology and became involved in athletics and student leadership. These early experiences helped him develop confidence, communication skills, and a belief in teamwork. After graduating in 1932, during the depths of the Great Depression, Reagan found work as a radio sports announcer, where his clear voice and engaging style quickly stood out. In the late 1930s, Reagan moved to Hollywood and began a career as a film actor. Over the next 2 decades, he appeared in more than 50 movies, often playing confident, moral, and patriotic characters. Although he never became a top Hollywood star, his acting career gave him national visibility and polished his public speaking skills. During World War II, Reagan served in the U.S. Army Air Forces, producing training films rather than serving on the front lines due to poor eyesight. This experience deepened his sense of patriotism and commitment to American ideals. Reagan's time in Hollywood also introduced him to labor politics and ideological conflict. As president of the Screen Actors Guild, he dealt with labor strikes and concerns about communist influence in the film industry. During this period, Reagan's political views began to shift. Originally a Democrat who supported Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, Reagan gradually became more conservative, believing that excessive government regulation limited personal freedom and economic growth. By the early 1960s, he had become a prominent conservative voice, eventually switching his party affiliation to Republican. Reagan's political rise began in earnest in 1964, when he delivered a televised speech supporting Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater. The speech, later known as A Time for Choosing, was widely praised for its clarity, conviction, and emotional power. It transformed Reagan from an actor into a serious political figure almost overnight. 2 years later, he ran for governor of California and won, serving 2 terms from 1967 to 1975. As governor, Reagan focused on reducing government spending, reforming welfare, and restoring order during a time of student protests and social unrest. Although his governorship included compromises and mixed results, it helped establish Reagan as a national leader. After an unsuccessful attempt to win the Republican presidential nomination in 1976, Reagan continued to build support among conservatives. By 1980, amid economic stagnation, high inflation, and international tension, Reagan ran for president against incumbent Jimmy Carter. His optimistic message, emphasis on economic recovery, and promise to restore American confidence resonated with voters. He won a decisive victory, becoming the oldest person up to that time to be elected President of the United States. Reagan took office in 1981, facing serious challenges. The American economy was struggling with high inflation, unemployment, and slow growth. Reagan introduced a bold economic program that later became known as Reaganomics. It focused on reducing taxes, cutting government spending, and limiting regulation, based on the belief that a freer market would encourage investment, productivity, and job creation. While critics argued that these policies increased inequality and government debt, supporters credited them with helping revive the economy. Later in the decade, just months after taking office, Reagan survived an assassination attempt, an event that shocked the nation. His calm and humor in the aftermath strengthened his public image as a resilient and steady leader. Throughout his presidency, Reagan was known for his strong communication skills, earning the nickname the Great Communicator. He spoke in simple, optimistic language that appealed to ordinary Americans and reinforced his vision of the United States as a force for good in the world. Foreign policy was one of the defining aspects of Reagan's presidency. A firm anti-communist, he took a hard stance against the Soviet Union, significantly increasing military spending and describing the USSR as an evil empire. This approach worried critics who feared it could escalate the Cold War. However, Reagan also believed deeply in the eventual possibility of peace through strength. In the mid-1980s, when Mikhail Gorbachev became the leader of the Soviet Union, Reagan recognized an opportunity for dialogue. Reagan and Gorbachev held several historic meetings, leading to important arms control agreements, including the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. These negotiations marked a major turning point in the Cold War, reducing nuclear tensions and building trust between the two superpowers. Reagan's famous speech in Berlin in 1987, in which he called on Gorbachev to tear down this wall, symbolized his belief in freedom and the eventual collapse of oppressive systems. Just 2 years later, the Berlin Wall fell, and the Cold War soon came to an end. Despite his successes, Reagan's presidency was not without controversy. One of the most serious was the Iran-Contra affair, in which members of his administration secretly sold weapons to Iran and used the proceeds to fund rebels in Nicaragua. Despite congressional restrictions, Reagan denied knowledge of the operation's details, but the scandal damaged public trust and raised questions about accountability within his administration. Domestically, Reagan also faced criticism over social issues. His administration was often accused of being slow to respond to the AIDS crisis, and some argued that his economic policies disproportionately benefited the wealthy. Supporters, however, pointed to strong economic growth in the latter half of the 1980s, a renewed sense of national confidence, and the peaceful easing of Cold War tensions as major achievements. Reagan left office in 1989 with high approval ratings, handing over leadership to his vice president, George H.W. Bush. In retirement, Reagan largely withdrew from public life. In 1994, he publicly announced that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. His letter to the American people was deeply moving and demonstrated the same dignity and optimism that had defined his public career. Ronald Reagan died on June 5, 2004, at the age of 93. His legacy remains complex and influential. To supporters, he is remembered as a leader who restored American confidence, helped end the Cold War, and championed individual freedom and limited government. To critics, he represents policies that increased inequality and weakened social programs. Regardless of perspective, Reagan's impact on American politics and global history is undeniable. Reagan's life story from small-town Illinois to Hollywood, from the governor's office to the presidency, reflects a uniquely American journey. His belief in optimism, communication, and the power of ideas allowed him to shape not only a political era, but also the way Americans understood leadership itself. Decades after his presidency, Ronald Reagan remains one of the most recognizable and debated figures in modern American history.